Give me $300,000 or you're dead to this family. My sister said that. Not a scammer, not a thug. My flesh and blood, just 4 days after I shared my massive win with the family I deeply trusted. When Saturday night finally came, 8 people sat frozen at my table. One was my very sharp lawyer, another was the local priest my mom brought to break me. But by the time dinner ended, I wasn't the one violently sobbing. It was Mallory. And she wasn't crying about the jackpot. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story genuinely speaks to you. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're all watching from. I'm Tessa. I'm 34. I'm an accountant from a small town outside Cleveland, Ohio. Let me take you back to a Thursday evening in May, the night I picked up my phone and made the single worst call of my entire life. I don't play the lottery. Let's get that straight right now. I'm the kind of girl who tracks every single dollar in a color-coded spreadsheet. I bring leftover casserole to work in plastic Tupperware just to save $8. But that Thursday, the air was thick and warm. I stopped to fill my gas tank at a dusty Sunoco station just outside Westlake. Sitting right there on the scratched glass counter was a bright Powerball sign, $5. My brain screamed no, but my hand handed over a crumpled bill. Why not? I thought. Just this once. Fast forward 5 days. Tuesday evening, the sky outside my small apartment window was completely dark. I was sitting on my faded sofa staring blindly at my glowing phone screen. I checked the numbers, then I checked them again. A third time, a fourth. By the 5th time, my hands were shaking so violently that the phone slipped right through my fingers and smacked against the floor. I couldn't breathe. My lungs simply forgot how to work. $1.8 million. After taxes, it would be around $950,000. It wasn't billionaire money, but it was enough. It was enough to change the entire timeline of my life. Enough to finally buy a real house. Enough to escape the endless draining cycle of renting. Enough to finally, truly breathe without panic. And then, I made my mistake. Before calling a financial advisor, before finding a good lawyer, before doing a single thing a smart, logical person would do, I called my mother. 10 seconds. That is exactly how long it took to turn the greatest miracle of my existence into a living, breathing nightmare. "Mom, you're not going to believe this," she screamed. I don't mean a gasp. I mean a glass-shattering shriek. I could actually hear the fabric of her shirt rustling as she pulled the phone away from her ear, shouting at the top of her lungs into the hallway. "Gordon, Tessa won the lottery! Tessa won the lottery!" I closed my eyes. For one brief, fragile moment, a desperate warmth flooded my chest. I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a little kid. I belong to them again. They actually see me. Within 2 hours, Dad called. His voice was thick and warm, softer than it had been in weeks. "Proud of you, kid." 3 little words. I had been chasing those 3 words my entire life like a starving dog. An hour after that, my older sister Mallory called. Her tone was dripping with honey. "Oh my God, Tessa, I'm so incredibly happy for you. We need to celebrate. Let's do a big family dinner." And then she casually slipped in the question. It seemed so perfectly harmless at the time. "So, how much is it actually, after taxes?" I told her. I told her the exact amount because I foolishly trusted her, because deep down I was still stupid enough to believe that good news could just be good news in this house. For about 3 short hours, I felt like I had a real family. Looking back, that was the most expensive feeling of my life. Wednesday morning, barely 12 hours later, the avalanche began. My phone screen simply refused to go dark. It kept lighting up, buzzing against my desk at work like an angry hornet. Mom called first. Her voice was perfectly casual, using that specific breezy tone she saves for when she wants something but needs you to think it's your own brilliant idea. "Honey, I've been meaning to mention, the roof has been leaking terribly again. The repair estimate came back at around $25,000. Wouldn't it be just wonderful if we could finally get that fixed?" My stomach gave a tiny dip. I murmured that I'd think about it. Before I could even process the heavy weight of her request, Dad called. He skipped the small talk. "No, good morning. No, how are you?" Just a heavy, disappointed sigh. "You know what your mother and I sacrificed for you, right? I worked double shifts for years just so you could go to college. Here's the cold truth about that statement. It's a lie. He did work double shifts, yes, but that extra money went straight to overdue bills, to Mallory's expensive cheerleading uniforms, and to a flashy boat he bought and sold 4 years later at a massive loss. My college tuition was paid for entirely with federal student loans. Loans I am still actively paying off at 34 years old. But I didn't say that. Not yet. I just swallowed the hard lump in my throat. By Wednesday night, the sweet honey in Mallory's voice was completely gone. She called me, and her tone was sharp as broken glass. Tessa, I need $300,000. Trent and I are drowning. The credit card debt, the mortgage. It's really bad. You have the cash now. This is what family does. I froze. $300,000 out of $950. She was demanding more than a quarter of everything I had just won. My pulse pounded violently in my ears. I managed to whisper that I needed some time to think. What's there to think about? She snapped. I opened my mouth to reply, but she cut me off, her voice dropping into a deadly flat command. If you say no to me, don't even bother showing up on Saturday. The line went dead. I sat alone in my dark apartment, the dead phone still gripped tight in my sweaty hand. Just 4 days ago, I was nobody to these people. I was invisible. One lucky piece of paper, and suddenly the whole family had cast a heavy, suffocating net over my life. But the true horror wasn't the money they were asking for. The true horror was that I didn't know yet how viciously organized they were about to get to break me down. Thursday morning broke through my bedroom blinds in dull gray slices. Before I even swung my legs out of bed, my phone buzzed, a text from a number I hadn't seen in weeks. Pastor Daniel Peterson from Mom's church. Tessa, your mother reached out to me. She is deeply concerned about you. Generosity is a blessing. I hope you will pray on this. Call me anytime. My stomach dropped into my shoes. So Mom had actually gone to the church. Of course she had. That was page 1 of the Diana Anderson playbook. When private guilt trips fail at home, make it a public spectacle. But that wasn't the worst of it. Mallory had been incredibly busy too. My screen kept lighting up with incoming texts from extended family. People who usually only remembered I existed when they needed someone to carve the Christmas turkey. Aunt Delilah, hey sweetie. Mallory called weeping. Everything okay? Uncle Bill, heard there's some nasty tension. Family is everything, Tessa. And then came the message that actually made my knees buckle. I sank down onto the cold tile of my office bathroom floor later that morning. It was from Grandma Rose, 83 years old, the sweet, gentle woman who spent an entire summer teaching me how to bake perfect cherry pies when I was 10. Her text read, I am so disappointed in you, sweetheart. A hot tear slid down my cheek. You didn't even ask for my side, Grandma. Mallory had gotten to her first. My older sister had speed-dialed every single person we shared DNA with and spun a tragic, twisted tale where she was the helpless victim and I was the greedy, heartless villain. I wiped my eyes and checked a new notification. Facebook. Mallory had posted publicly in our family group, "Pray for our family today." It breaks my heart how quickly some people forget what blood means the second money shows up. 18 sympathetic reactions, 10 comments, all of them comforting her. Then, the digital warfare violently spilled over into my real, physical life. Thursday afternoon, I was sitting at my desk, desperately trying to run a simple quarterly expense report. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like a trapped bird in my throat. Suddenly my office phone rang. It was the front reception desk. Tessa, the receptionist whispered, sounding absolutely terrified. Your cousin is here in the lobby. She's being very loud. I sprinted down the carpeted hallway. There stood Cousin Brenda, our family's designated attack dog. She was planted right next to the glass-walled conference room where my managing partner was meeting with top-tier clients. Your own sister is crying her eyes out, Tessa. Brenda screamed at the top of her lungs, pointing a bright red fingernail right at my face. You're sitting up here in the fancy AC, acting like you're so much better than us, while your family falls apart in the dirt. Every single head in the quiet, professional office turned to stare. Mortification washed over me like a bucket of ice water. I had to physically step between her shaking finger and my boss's sightline, quietly begging the security guard to escort her out. I was trembling so violently I had to lean against the wall just to walk back to my desk. They weren't just trying to guilt me anymore. They were actively trying to destroy my reputation. Sitting there, completely humiliated, a sudden, practical thought hit me, a thought that made my hands shake even harder. 3 years ago, I co-signed the bank loan for Dad's shiny new truck. If he got angry and stopped making those monthly payments out of spite, my pristine credit score would completely crater. I wouldn't be able to buy that dream house. And what about Mom's savings account? I was listed as a co-holder back in 2018. Why? Because she had faked a series of severe, terrifying heart palpitations, convinced a younger, naive me that she might drop dead any day, and emotionally blackmailed me into signing the papers so I could manage her affairs. She could access my financial history anytime. They didn't just have emotional leverage. They had financial weapons pointed right at my chest, and I was absolutely right to be terrified. Friday morning, 9:02 a.m. my cell rang. It was Marcus, the branch manager at First National Bank. "Tessa, I need you to get down here right now," he whispered urgently, sounding totally panicked. "Your mother is standing in my lobby demanding to freeze your joint account to use it as collateral for a massive personal loan. She has your social security number and she's causing a major scene." My blood ran ice cold. She is trying to steal my future. I dropped my coffee, sprinted to my car, and sped down High Street like a maniac. I barely made it in time to sign the legal blocks preventing my own mother from hijacking my credit score. The walls of my life were closing in at the speed of light. That night, exhausted and shattered, I opened my laptop. I started doing something I hadn't dared to tell anyone about yet. I am an accountant. Numbers, logic, and spreadsheets are what I do for a living, but somehow, in all the long years I'd been quietly emptying my pockets to keep this family afloat, I had never once added it all up. I opened a blank, blindingly white spreadsheet that Friday night. I pulled up my messy bank statements going all the way back to 2016. I meticulously cross-referenced Venmo transfers, wire receipts, and old canceled checks. The glowing screen was my only comfort. It took me 5 agonizing hours. Row 1, May 2018, $40,000 wired straight to Mallory Anderson Cole. She and Trent had separated for the very first time. She desperately needed rent, a security deposit, groceries, and a pricey lawyer consultation. I covered every single penny. I still had her exact text saved on an old drive. "I'll pay you back when I get back on my feet." I swear, she never paid back a single cent. Row 2, July 2020, $20,000 for a 2016 Chevy Silverado. Dad's old rusted truck had broken down, and his credit was too ruined to get approved for a loan on his own. I bought it for him outright. When I proudly handed him the shiny keys, he just shrugged and said, "We'll figure it out." There was nothing to figure out. He simply never brought it up again. That exact truck is still parked in his cracked driveway right now. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I was only halfway through the dusty stack of bank statements, and the numbers were already making me physically sick, but the real devastation was waiting on the very next page, and it was about to unlock a fury inside me that I didn't know I possessed. Row 3, February 2021, $28,000 for mom's knee surgery. Medical insurance covered a tiny fraction, but not nearly enough to keep her out of pain. I paid the massive remaining balance directly to the hospital's billing department. When I gently brought it up weeks later, she didn't offer gratitude. She just patted my hand, looked away, and whispered, "Well, that's what good daughters do." Row 4, November 2022, $19,000 in rent for Mallory's fancy apartment. She and Trent had separated yet again. For 8 long, agonizing months, I covered her lease while eating cheap noodles. She eventually went back to her husband in May 2023 and acted like those 8 months never happened. I finally scrolled down to the bottom of the glowing spreadsheet. I clicked the auto sum button. $107,000. $107,000. Oh my God, I had never actually seen it grouped as one terrifying number before. In my head, I had always justified each crisis as a separate, isolated event. A quick favor here, a generous gift there, as I sat there numbly pulling out a thick stack of old bank statements from my metal filing cabinet. A piece of folded pink construction paper fluttered to the carpet. I reached down and picked it up. It was a handmade drawing Layla had proudly colored for me last Thanksgiving. Crooked stick figures of me and her holding hands at the city zoo. In messy, uneven purple crayon, she had written, "My hero auntie." I stared at those wobbly letters. For the last 3 days I had been completely suffocating under a crushing mountain of anxiety, terrified of losing my family. But looking at that innocent drawing, the icy panic locked in my chest suddenly burned away. It evaporated into thin air. In its place grew nothing but white-hot, razor-sharp fury. I am awake now. I wasn't even angry about the stolen cash anymore. I was furious about the cycle. I was absolutely not going to let them infect this sweet little girl. I refused to let my niece grow up believing this toxic, suffocating manipulation was what love looked like. I spent Saturday morning quietly running the brutal math on what would actually happen if I did nothing. If I cave and hand Mallory $300,000, I lose more than a quarter of my hard-won safety net. The beautiful little house I've been dreaming of disappears into smoke. I go right back to scraping by, back to packing Tupperware lunches, back to watching my checking balance like a hospital heart monitor. Worst of all, Mallory learns for the 6th time that screaming the loudest gets her exactly what she wants. But if I stay totally silent and refuse her demand, she completely controls the narrative. She had already poisoned Grandma Rose against me. She already dragged the local church into our messy drama. She deployed Cousin Brenda to humiliate me at my corporate job. And then there were the invisible chains. Dad held the truck loan. If he stopped paying out of petty spite, my credit score craters overnight. Mom had full access to that joint savings account, and she had already tried to weaponize it. They could easily squeeze the life out of me without ever raising their voices. Those were the cold financial calculations. But the real, soul-crushing math happened at exactly 3:15 p.m. on Thursday. My phone rang loudly. The screen flashed Mallory's number. I braced myself for another screaming match and pressed accept. But it wasn't my sister. "Auntie Tessa?" A tiny, fragile voice, shaking. "Mommy says you don't love us anymore. Is that really true?" Layla, 8 years old, the sweet kid I take to the tiger exhibit every spring. The child who painstakingly crafted me a sparkly card last Christmas that said best aunt in the world because she hadn't learned how to spell aunt correctly yet. Mallory had actually put her own daughter on the phone, or, perhaps even worse, Mallory had venomously said those terrible words right in front of her, fully knowing the child would call me in tears. Either way, my sister had just used an 8-year-old baby as a human weapon. "Layla, honey," I whispered, my throat tight with unshed tears. "I love you so much. That will never, ever change." "Then why is Mommy crying on the floor?" I squeezed my eyes shut. In that exact second, something deep inside my ribcage shifted far past the point of repair. A heavy steel door slammed shut in my mind. "You can take my savings. You can call me a selfish monster to every single person in this town. But you do not get to use an 8-year-old child to break my spirit. That is the final line." I wiped my face, picked up my phone, and dialed Rebecca Wakefield. She was my old college roommate and a brilliant family law attorney. She answered on the second ring. I said, my voice eerily calm and steady. "I need your professional help. Are you free this Saturday?" She said yes. And in that moment, the hunted officially became the hunter. They thought they had cornered a frightened daughter, but they had no idea who they had just invited to dinner. Thursday night, rain pattered softly against my kitchen window. I was warming up leftover chicken noodle soup when my cell phone vibrated across the counter. Mallory's contact photo flashed. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Finally, I swiped answer. "Have you thought about it?" Her tone was completely flat, totally transactional, like a cold business deal. "I have. I am not giving you $300,000. Heavy silence followed. 1 second. 2, 3, 4. "So that is your final answer?" "That is my answer." More dead air. Then her pitch dropped into a familiar, nasty register. It was the exact sound she used to make people feel tiny. She had been perfecting that cruel edge since we were kids playing in the backyard. "Fine. Then I will tell Layla you chose a pile of cash over her." My grip tightened. Do not bring Layla into this mess. She is already in it. She asked me why her favorite aunt is acting so selfish. She is an 8-year-old child. She only asked because you manipulated her into it. Click, she hung up. I stared blindly at the darkened screen. Behind me, the soup was boiling over the metal pot, hissing loudly as it hit the hot stove burner. I didn't even move to turn it off. I was paralyzed by the sheer cruelty of my own flesh and blood. Half an hour later, a soft chime broke the quiet. A new text message glowed on my locked display. It wasn't from my sister. It was from her husband, Trent. 7 simple words. "I am sorry about all of this." I read that brief sentence twice, rubbing my tired eyes. Trent had never messaged me directly, not a single time in the 8 long years he had been married to my sibling. He was always just background noise. The quiet guy who dutifully loaded the dirty dishes after Thanksgiving dinner while his wife held court at the head of the table. The man who just nodded along whenever she spoke and quickly vanished into the garage when she stopped. But here he was, 7 words, no extra context, no follow-up explanation. I typed a reply, hesitated, and quickly deleted it. Instead, I carefully saved his message and placed the device face down on the cool granite counter. I had no idea what his cryptic apology meant yet, but my accountant brain filed it away in the exact same mental folder where I keep track of things that simply do not add up. Sometimes tiny numbers seem completely insignificant at first glance, but they end up mattering far more than anything else on the entire balance sheet. My dinner had burned completely. I ate a bowl of dry cereal instead, chewing mechanically in the dark. Friday morning, exactly 9:08 a.m. I remember the precise minute because I was gripping a mug of black coffee when my father's name suddenly lit up. Gordon Anderson never calls before noon unless someone is hospitalized or he is absolutely furious. Nobody was in the hospital. You will give your sister exactly what she asked for. No standard greeting, no good morning, kiddo. Just a harsh, booming command delivered in the exact same scolding voice he used when I was 13 and accidentally tracked muddy shoes onto the living room carpet. Dad, that is not how this works. I did not raise you to behave this way. My pulse hammered against my ribs. I took a deep breath. You didn't pay for my college education, Dad. I did. Total silence. It was the longest, heaviest quiet I had ever experienced from my father. This was a man who always had something loud to say. He held strong opinions on literally everything. Sunday football games, national politics, even the way our neighbors mowed their front lawns. But after I spoke that one undeniable truth, the line went dead quiet. All I could hear was the faint murmur of a news anchor playing on the television in his background. When he finally found his voice again, it was forged from solid iron. Saturday dinner, be there, and bring a much better attitude. I will be there, I replied softly. But I am bringing something else. He slammed the phone down. I sat frozen at my small kitchen table and realized my whole body was trembling. But it wasn't from fear. I was shaking from the shocking realization that I had just talked back to my intimidating father for the very first time in 34 years. And the sky had not fallen. The earth beneath my feet did not crack open and swallow me whole. I was still sitting here, still breathing, still holding a ceramic mug that was slowly going cold. I immediately dialed Rebecca. She answered on the very first ring. Are you absolutely sure about doing this? She asked gently. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. Then I will be at your place by 5:30. Wear something comfortable. And listen to me, do not let them see you sweat. I ended the call and opened my laptop one last time. There it was, the spreadsheet, $107,000. I hit the print button. I watched the machine spit out every single page of my financial sacrifice. Then, I neatly placed the warm papers into a plain manila folder and set it carefully by the front door. Okay, I need to pause the story here for just a second. In my personal experience, explosive moments like these, where your own dad tells you that you owe him your success, rarely come out of nowhere. He had lost his decent-paying factory job 6 years prior to this mess. He had spent years sitting aimlessly at home, watching his youngest daughter become far more financially stable than he ever managed to be. I am certainly not making excuses for his toxic behavior, but I do understand the deep hidden wound underneath his anger. A wounded ego can make people do terrible things. Now here is what I want to ask you guys. When my sister threatened to turn her young daughter against me, do you think she was just bluffing to scare me? Or do you truly believe she would have gone through with such a heartless act? Let me know your thoughts down below. Let's get right back into the drama. I thought I had prepared for every possible trick they could throw at me. But a random, everyday trip to the grocery store was about to reveal a secret so massive it would completely change the rules of the entire game. Saturday afternoon, I needed basic things. Milk, a carton of eggs. The kind of mindless, ordinary errands that prove the world hasn't stopped spinning just because my personal universe is violently collapsing. I drove to the local Meijer on Maple Street. The parking lot was packed with families living normal lives. I was popping the trunk, loading plastic bags, when a raspy voice called my name. Tessa, wait. It was Trent Cole. He was standing 2 parking spots away. In one hand he gripped a heavy plastic jug of orange juice. In the other, a bulky box of nighttime pull-ups. She still needs those. It was a fiercely guarded secret my niece had whispered to me during a zoo trip, treating it like classified government intel. Trent looked absolutely wrecked. Dark, bruised-looking bags hung heavy under his bloodshot eyes. He sported 3 days of rough, graying stubble. His faded work jacket carried a thick grease stain on the left sleeve that had probably been there since winter. I didn't know about that phone call to Layla, he muttered, his voice cracking with exhaustion. I only found out last night. He shifted the heavy juice jug, looking utterly defeated. I told her never to do that. She didn't listen to me. I stared at him, my anger warring with deep pity. Then why are you still playing along with this madness, Trent? He dropped his gaze to the cracked asphalt, his jaw clenched tight. Because I have nowhere else to go. It was the single most honest sentence that man had ever spoken in my presence. A 39-year-old plumber, a father, a husband, completely trapped. Not anchored by affection, but imprisoned by raw logistics. He took a heavy step toward his battered van, then he paused and glanced back over his shoulder. For what it's worth, you have been more than fair to this family. I just needed you to know that someone actually sees it. He climbed into his driver's seat and faded into the afternoon traffic. I stood frozen on the pavement, clutching my eggs. He knows something. That exhausted man was carrying a burden much heavier than groceries. He knew exactly how much secret debt his wife was hiding. And it wasn't just my money she had taken. That parking lot encounter made a mysterious phone call from the night before suddenly make terrifying sense. Friday evening, I had been curled on my sofa, reviewing the printed spreadsheets when Aunt Delilah's name flashed on my screen. I braced for impact. Here comes the next wave of guilt. Mallory called me yesterday, Delilah started gently. She claimed you are flat out refusing to help the family. I took a defensive breath. Delilah, Stop, she interrupted, her tone softer than expected. I didn't call to lecture you, sweetheart. My aunt is 56. She teaches 5th grade math and is notoriously the quietest person at any Anderson gathering. That usually meant she was either the smartest one in the room or the most terrified. Your father borrowed $15,000 from me back in 2017, she confessed quietly. He never repaid a single penny. When I finally asked about it, he ignored my calls for 8 straight months. In 34 years, no one had ever breathed a word of this to me. My jaw dropped. I've watched this toxic pattern for decades, she whispered sadly. You are not the first person Gordon and Diana have drained. You are simply the first one brave enough to actually stand up. My throat burned. Why did you stay silent? Because he is my big brother. And honestly, until today I didn't think anyone would ever believe me. She paused, taking a shaky breath. I was invited to the dinner tomorrow. I will be there. Delilah, thank you, I choked out. Don't thank me yet, she warned. There is something else going on, but it isn't my place to spill it. You will find out soon enough. The line clicked dead. I sat in the dark for a long time. The thick manila folder rested on my coffee table, fat and quiet. Tomorrow it would speak for me. But that night, for the first time in an agonizing week, I didn't feel completely alone. Saturday, 6 p.m., the sky hanging over our Ohio suburbs was a sickly bruised shade of yellowish gray. It looked like the weather couldn't decide between a bitter winter storm and a muddy spring shower, so it just gave up and gave us nothing. At exactly 5:30 sharp, Rebecca's sleek car pulled into my complex. She stepped out wearing a sharp black blazer, carrying a thick leather satchel, and rocking sensible, dangerous-looking heels. She looked prepped to destroy a hostile witness in a federal deposition, not eat a homemade pot roast. Ready? She asked smoothly. No, I admitted. Let's go. We took my sedan, a tense 20-minute drive. We passed the very gas station where this whole nightmare began. We drove past the elementary school where Delilah taught, past the brick chapel where Pastor Peterson prepared his sermons. Finally, we pulled up to my childhood home, a single-story brick ranch house sitting on a dying, patchy brown half-acre. A rusted basketball hoop from 1999 clung to the garage roof, its net long rotted away. Gordon was never much of a yard man. 3 vehicles were already crammed into the narrow driveway. The pastor's modest gray Buick, Delilah's trusty Subaru, and my sister's messy minivan. And sitting squarely in the prime spot right out front, the shiny 2016 Chevy Silverado I had purchased for $20,000. Mud caked its expensive chrome wheels. I grabbed the thick folder from the back seat. Rebecca adjusted her strap. Mom yanked the front door open before we could even knock. She wore her nice floral blouse, the one she strictly reserved for Sunday mornings. Her sharp eyes instantly darted to my companion. Who is this? She demanded. This is Rebecca, my friend, I said evenly. She is joining us for dinner. Deanna's fake, welcoming smile vanished completely, thinning into a hard line. We didn't set a place for her. Then we will add a chair, I replied, stepping past her into the house. The narrow hallway smelled heavily of cooked meat and garlic potatoes. CNN mumbled softly from the den. The dining area was fully staged. 8 perfectly arranged place settings. I instantly noticed exactly where they had positioned my spot. Dead center, directly across from Dad, like a criminal facing the executioner. Everyone was already seated, waiting in suffocating silence. Gordon anchored the head of the table. Mallory sat tightly to his right, wearing freshly applied makeup, her chin tilted up in pure defiance. Trent sat frozen beside her, staring blankly at the salt shaker. Delilah occupied the far end, watching everything with owl-like intensity. Pastor Peterson sat near Mom's empty seat, a thick leather Bible resting securely on his knee. Someone had begrudgingly unfolded a flimsy metal chair and shoved it in the corner near the window for my guest. Rebecca calmly inspected the cheap seat, glanced at me, and sat down with graceful silence. She didn't utter a single syllable. She didn't need a spot at their feast. She just needed to be inside the room. And as my mother brought the steaming food to the table, the air grew so thick and heavy that I knew the trap was fully set. All I had to do was drop the match. Mom carried the heavy ceramic platter from the kitchen, setting the steaming pot roast squarely in the center of the tablecloth. The rich smell of roasted meat and carrots filled the cramped space, but nobody reached for the serving fork. This food wasn't meant to be eaten. It was just a prop for the intervention. Gordon didn't wait for grace. "Let's get this over with," he grumbled. His tone was rough, like a judge eager to hand down a harsh sentence. Diana immediately sank into her wooden chair and reached out, clutching the pastor's forearm as if she were drowning. "Tessa, Pastor Peterson is here because we love you so much. We are deeply worried about you." "My soul or my wallet, Mom." The older man cleared his throat, offering a gentle, sympathetic smile. "Tessa, your mother tells me there has been some unfortunate tension recently. Family is God's very first gift to us. Generosity is." "Pastor," I interrupted softly. My voice didn't shake. "With all due respect, were you actually told the full story before you drove over here?" He blinked, clearly thrown off balance. Mallory didn't even give the poor man a second to process the question. "The full story is that you won $1 million and absolutely refused to help your own flesh and blood," she snapped. Gordon tapped the solid wood surface with 2 thick fingers. A warning sound. "That is enough, Tessa. We are not asking for all your winnings. Just help your older sister out of a jam. That is exactly what good people do." Diana's eyes were already brimming with watery red tears. She had perfectly prepared the waterworks in advance. "I did not raise my youngest daughter to be so cold," she whimpered, dabbing her cheek with a cloth napkin. I didn't argue. Not yet. I just looked around the crowded dining room. Gordon's jaw was locked tight. Mallory sat with her arms stubbornly crossed. Diana played the weeping martyr. The pastor looked incredibly uncomfortable, suddenly sensing a trap. Only Aunt Delilah remained perfectly still in the corner. Instead of shouting, I slowly reached down. I picked up the thick manila folder from my lap and gently placed it flat on the table, right between the steaming meat and the woven bread basket. Every single pair of eyes instantly locked onto it. It was just a plain brown envelope, maybe half an inch thick, but sitting there next to the dinner rolls, it looked exactly like a ticking landmine disguised as a tax return. "Before I open this," I announced, keeping my pitch perfectly level, "I have one simple question." Nobody breathed. The roast sizzled softly. The television droned in the background. Somewhere outside, a neighborhood dog barked at the wind. I locked eyes with my sister. "How much do you think you have ever given me?" Her plucked eyebrows pulled together in genuine confusion. "What? In 34 years of life, how much money have you ever handed to me? Give me a dollar amount," she scoffed. "That is not the point here, Tessa." "It is exactly the point." I slowly turned my gaze to the head of the table. "Dad, same question. How much financial support have you given me since the day I turned 18? He stiffened violently in his seat, the familiar purple vein in his right temple, the one that pops up whenever he feels cornered, pulsed angrily. "We gave you a solid roof. We gave you hot food. We gave you life. And now you expect me to pay the ultimate late fee for it." "I moved out at 18, I replied calmly. "I have been paying my own way ever since. Student loans, apartment rent, everything." Diana gasped, pressing a trembling hand to her chest. "You are keeping score? Is that what the sickness is, after everything we sacrificed for you?" I looked at my mother. This was the woman who used to gently braid my hair before middle school. The mom who stayed up past midnight sewing my Halloween costumes, who once drove 40 miles to deliver a forgotten science project. My heart ached terribly. I wanted the whole room to know that I still loved her deeply. "No, Mom," I whispered. feeling a painful lump in my throat. I never kept score, but you forced me to start counting. I flipped the folder open. The entire room went dead silent in a way I had never experienced inside this house. Growing up, this family filled every empty second with chaotic noise, arguments, football games, shouting opinions. But when those crisp white pages finally came out into the light, the absolute only sound was the sharp creak of paper sliding against paper. The very first page was a printed bank wire confirmation, clearly dated May 14, 2018. $40,000 sent directly from my checking account to Mallory Anderson Cole. I read the black ink aloud the exact same way I would read a sterile audit at work. Totally calm, highly precise, zero emotion. May 2018. $40,000 wired to Mallory, purpose listed, apartment rent, security deposit, weekly groceries, and a legal consultation during her first separation from Trent. Mallory's chin shot up defensively. That was a gift, but as I slowly reached for the second piece of paper, the color violently drained from her face, because she suddenly realized I had brought the exact receipts she thought were buried forever. I reached into the folder, slowly pulling out a crisp, colorful printed screenshot of an old text message. The exact date and timestamp were glaringly visible across the top of the white paper. Mallory's exact text, I read, feeling absolutely no remorse. Sent May 16, 2018. I will pay you back the second I get back on my feet. I swear, you never paid back a single red cent. From the dark corner of the dining room, Rebecca finally moved. The brilliant family law attorney stood smoothly from her folding metal chair. Her leather heels clicked softly against the linoleum floor. She casually reached over the table, plucked a fresh copy of the printed screenshot from her pristine satchel, and placed it directly down in front of Pastor Peterson. He stared down at it. He looked exactly like a stunned man receiving an unexpected eviction notice. I continued down the stack without missing a beat. November 2022. $19,000 for 8 straight months of rent covering Mallory's luxury apartment during her second separation from Trent. My sister's face was rapidly changing color. The stubborn defiance was still there, but beneath the thick mascara, a jagged crack was forming in her perfect wall. That was totally different, she sputtered defensively, crossing her arms tight. I was in a deeply bad place mentally. I know you were, I replied softly. And I helped you survive it. However, your desperate text from that specific period, printed clearly here on page 5, reads, I promise I will make it all up to you somehow. You never did. I set the pages face down and slowly looked toward the guest of honor. Pastor Peterson was carefully reading the thick printout Rebecca had just handed him, his heavy reading glasses pushed low on his nose. He looked up at my mother, then slowly lowered his gaze back down to the damning evidence. I watched his deeply lined face with extreme focus. This was a righteous man who had confidently strolled into our house less than an hour ago, fully believing his divine job was to counsel a greedy, selfish daughter. He was currently reading hard proof that the tragic sob story he had been spoon-fed was missing roughly 70 very expensive pages. He didn't speak yet, but I saw his jaw visibly tighten into a hard knot. I calmly turned my attention to the next heavy section of the brown folder. July 2020, $20,000. I let the number hang thickly in the warm air. For a 2016 Chevy Silverado belonging to Gordon Anderson. I looked my father squarely in the eye. He was gripping the thin wooden edge of the dining table with both heavy, calloused hands. His knuckles were bone white. Dad, I asked quietly, refusing to break his furious stare, have you made a single monthly payment back to me? He didn't answer. He couldn't. The purple vein in his temple was throbbing so hard it looked painful. The truck, his precious truck, the exact vehicle he proudly drove down to the hardware store, his barber, and the Elks Lodge every single week like a king, was sitting right outside in the cracked driveway. Everyone trapped at this table could clearly see its shiny blue chrome bumper glowing through the living room window. I moved mercilessly to the next thick page. February 2021. $28,000 for mom's emergency knee surgery. Health insurance covered a minor portion. I personally paid the massive remaining balance directly to the hospital's billing department. Diana's face completely crumpled. I am your own mother, she shrieked, tears rapidly flowing. That is exactly what dutiful children are supposed to do. Then what do parents do, Mom? I fired back, my voice trembling for the first time all night. No answer. Just the pathetic sound of Diana frantically folding and unfolding her wet cloth napkin. Total sum across 9 exhausting years. I slowly laid the final terrifying summary page perfectly flat on the wood. The brutal number was printed in stark, bold font at the very bottom. Simple, clean, completely stripped of emotional commentary. $107,000. I pointed my finger directly at the paper. That is exactly what this family owes me, not the other way around. I reached over and closed the folder. I didn't aggressively slam it down. I didn't raise my voice to shout. I just firmly pressed the plain brown cover shut and set both my shaking hands flat on either side of it. The silence stretched out like a suffocating rubber band. It was Aunt Delilah who finally spoke first. She had remained perfectly, hauntingly silent for the entire horrific dinner. When her low voice finally broke through the quiet, it cut across the stuffy room like freezing cold air rushing through a suddenly kicked open door. $107,000, Gordon, she whispered, her eyes drilling into her older brother. And you are honestly sitting right here in front of God and demanding more from her? Gordon's head whipped around toward his little sister. For a terrifying second, I genuinely thought he was going to flip the entire table or start screaming at the top of his lungs. But he didn't. He just stared blankly at her, and for the very first time in my entire adult life, I saw something in my terrifying father's face that I had never ever witnessed before. He looked completely caught, but it was the holy man next to my mother who finally dropped the hammer, turning the family's greatest weapon directly against them. Mallory slammed her flat palms so hard against the dining table that the silverware rattled. "This is private family business," she shrieked, her voice cracking in pure panic. She had zero right to bring a strange lawyer and detailed spreadsheets to a Sunday dinner. I didn't even blink. I didn't raise my pitch by a single fraction. You made it public when you posted those cruel lies on Facebook, Mallory. You made it a community affair when Mom dragged the pastor into it. You made it an office spectacle when you sent Cousin Brenda to scream at me in the middle of my workplace. I am just finishing the exact game you started. The room plunged into a suffocating stillness. Mallory opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Her expensive makeup was freely running now, tracing 2 jagged black lines down her pale cheeks. Pastor Peterson pushed back his heavy wooden chair and slowly stood up. He picked up his worn Bible, holding it tight against his chest. "I believe I have heard enough," he said, his voice completely stripped of its earlier warmth. "Diana, Gordon, I strongly encourage you both to reflect on your actions deeply." He walked slowly around the edge of the table, bypassing my parents entirely. He stopped right in front of me and extended his rough hand. I shook it firmly. He then gave a respectful nod to Rebecca, who still hadn't spoken a single word all evening. Then he turned and walked out. The heavy front door clicked shut behind him. The entire room seemed to physically exhale. The untouched pot roast had gone stone cold. The woven bread basket sat there next to the devastating folder, looking exactly like a depressing painting someone would title American Family in May. I waited patiently until the low rumble of the pastor's car engine faded completely out of the driveway. Then, I spoke to the wreckage. "I am not asking a single person here to pay me back. I am not here for petty revenge, but I need everyone at this table to listen very carefully to what happens next." Gordon's eyes were fixed blankly on the dark window. Diana was gripping her wet napkin with both hands, her knuckles pale. Mallory was aggressively wiping away her ruined mascara with the back of her wrist. Trent was staring down at the salt shaker, looking like a ghost. "1, I stated clearly. I am officially removing my name from Mom's joint savings account tomorrow morning so she can never ever attempt to leverage my credit again." Diana flinched visibly as if I had struck her. 2, I am filing paperwork to refinance the cosign on Dad's heavy truck. If the bank somehow approves it, my name comes off the title. If they deny it, I am giving you exactly 60 days to locate a brand new cosigner. Gordon didn't move a single muscle. He was a statue made of stone. 3, there will be absolutely no more secret loans. No more expensive gifts cleverly disguised as family obligations. If anyone in this bloodline ever needs financial assistance again, we will discuss it like mature adults, not with crushing guilt trips, not by weaponizing pastors, and definitely not with threats. I paused, letting the heavy, uncomfortable silence do the heavy lifting for me. And 4, I slowly turned my head and locked eyes directly with my older sister. "If you ever use Layla as a pawn against me again, ever, you will never hear from me for the rest of your life. Not because I do not love my niece, but because that innocent child deserves far better than being swung around like a weapon." Mallory's lower lip trembled violently, but she didn't dare speak. Rebecca sat comfortably in the dim corner, her hands neatly folded in her lap. She hadn't even unzipped her professional satchel. She hadn't produced a single legal document. She hadn't spoken one solitary word the entire agonizing night. She simply didn't need to. Her mere presence, a sharp attorney sitting quietly in the room, absorbing every dark secret, was the absolute quietest and heaviest weapon at that table. I am not sitting here because I hate this family, I added softly, feeling a sudden wave of exhaustion. I am here because this is the absolute last time I will ever sit at a table where loving someone means blindly letting them take from me. Gordon suddenly pushed his chair back. The wooden legs scraped harshly against the cheap linoleum floor. It was a terrible screeching sound that sliced through the quiet like a dull blade. He stood up to his full height. He didn't look down at me. He didn't glance at Delilah. He didn't look at anyone. He just walked stiffly down the narrow hallway, turned left into the master bedroom, and closed the solid door. No loud shouting, no bitter parting shot, just the quiet, pathetic click of a door latch from a proud man who had finally run out of arguments and completely lacked the emotional vocabulary for anything else. Diana immediately stood up and chased after him. "Gordon!" she cried out. The bedroom door stayed firmly shut. Mom stood alone in the dark hallway for a few agonizing seconds, her hand hovering over the brass knob. Then she slowly turned around and walked straight into the kitchen. Seconds later, I heard the running water. She was doing the dirty dishes. The dinner hadn't even been served, and she was already frantically scrubbing plates to avoid reality. That left exactly 5 of us sitting at the ruined table. Mallory was crying openly now. These weren't the fake, performative tears she had staged earlier for the pastor. These were real, messy, terrifying sobs. The ugly kind that make your nose run and your voice violently break. "You have shattered this family," she shrieked at me. And then, the unthinkable happened. Trent spoke. "No, Mallory, she didn't." Every single head snapped toward him. Trent Cole, the silent background husband, the dutiful nodder, the man who had never once raised his voice inside this brick house. He was suddenly sitting bolt upright in his chair, and his face was flushed a deep, furious crimson. "We owe $300,000, Trent stated, his voice shaking violently but loud enough to rattle the fine china in the cabinet. "Because she forged my signature." The air left my lungs. She took out secret second mortgages, shady personal loans from terrible places, entirely in my name. Trent was almost shouting now, tears of pure rage pooling in his eyes. "You know that. I know that. If we do not pay it off by the end of this month, the bank is coming to take our home, and I am personally going to federal prison for massive fraud, and you wanted Tessa to magically bail us out so your perfect parents would never find out you are a literal criminal." "Trent, shut up," Mallory screamed, clapping her hands over her ears. "No, I am finished shutting up." Mallory stared at her husband in absolute horror. This wasn't just a simple betrayal. This was a nightmare far worse for her fragile ego. It was the naked truth, violently exposed by the one person she confidently assumed would never ever say it out loud. She wildly looked around the table. Delilah, me, Rebecca. Nobody was stepping up to save her. Mallory covered her ruined face with both shaking hands and sobbed into the quiet room. She wasn't crying about the massive debt. She was crying because the very last dark secret she held was officially gone. I want to pause the story right here again. I know some of you might be watching this and thinking, "Tessa, Trent just intentionally blew up his own failing marriage right at your dinner table." And honestly, I thought the exact same thing sitting right there in that chair. But here is what I realized much later. Trent had been silently watching Mallory lie to every single person in his life for years. He was completely exhausted. Sometimes a person doesn't explode because of one single moment. They explode because of 1,000 crushing moments of silence that came long before it. So here is my question for you guys. Do you think Trent was right to drop that massive bomb at the table, or should he have confronted Mallory privately first? Drop your honest take in the comments below. Okay, let's get back into the fallout. Tuesday morning, 10:15 a.m., I walked straight through the glass doors of First National Bank on High Street and confidently asked to remove my name from the joint savings account. The familiar teller, a sweet woman named Kathy who had processed my meager deposits for 7 years, looked at her glowing screen and then back at my face. "Are you entirely sure about this, honey?" she asked gently. I have never been more sure of anything. It took 30 long minutes of signing paperwork. When I finally walked out, the cool May wind hit my flushed face, and I just stood right there on the concrete sidewalk for a long moment, breathing in the fresh air. One heavy chain down. Wednesday morning, I called the credit union about Dad's ridiculous truck loan. I officially filed the thick paperwork for a complete refinance. The polite loan officer told me the tedious process would take roughly 45 to 60 days. We will definitely need the primary borrower's full cooperation, he warned. I simply told him I understood. Thursday brought total silence from Gordon. Complete radio silence from Mallory. Friday afternoon, Diana finally called. I actually picked up the phone. I answered because she is still my mother, and some deep-rooted childhood instincts simply do not die in a single week. You have selfishly torn this beautiful family apart, Tessa, she whispered, her voice trembling with accusation. I simply set a healthy boundary, Mom. That is entirely different. She hung up. But the agonizing quiet didn't last long. The very next morning, the mail arrived, and inside was a handwritten envelope that was about to shatter everything I thought I knew about the women in my family. Saturday morning brought a strange, heavy quiet to my apartment. I was walking back from the mailbox when a specific envelope caught my eye. No email notification, no angry text message, a physical, handwritten letter. I recognized the shaky, elegant cursive instantly. Grandma rose. My stomach tied itself into a painful knot. Please, not another attack. I can't take another one. I slid my thumb under the paper flap and pulled out the card. Dear Tessa, I only heard one side of the story. I am so deeply sorry that I judged you blindly. Your late grandfather would have been incredibly proud of your strength. Please come see me when you are ready. Love, Grandma. I sat down hard at my small kitchen table, buried my face in my hands, and finally wept. For the very first time all week, I completely broke down, not because of the apology itself, but because it proved a terrifying thought wrong. Someone in my family can actually hear the truth and change their mind. That same weekend, the phone rang again. It was Aunt Delilah. Her voice was hushed, almost secretive. I need you to know something important, she murmured. Gordon borrowed $10,000 from your grandmother back in 2019. She never told a single soul. He never paid it back. I closed my swollen eyes. The massive dollar amount didn't shock me anymore. The generational pattern did. The toxic cycle ran so much deeper than I ever realized. You are not the only victim, Tessa, Delilah whispered gently. You are simply the bravest one of us all. 3 weeks dragged by after that disastrous Saturday dinner. Delilah became my quiet informant. She told me that Mallory and Trent had officially started intense marriage counseling. I didn't pry for messy details. It wasn't my business anymore. But Delilah offered one stunning fact anyway. Trent had laid everything out on the therapist's table, the secret crushing debt, the cruel phone call forcing Layla to cry, all of it. I felt a complicated, heavy ache in my chest when I heard that. It wasn't smug satisfaction. It wasn't exactly sadness either. It was just the crushing weight of knowing that one single dinner had violently cracked open far more trauma than I ever originally intended. Trent actually called me once. The conversation was incredibly brief and painfully direct. I should have spoken up years ago, he said roughly. I am so sorry I didn't protect you. You spoke up when it mattered most, Trent, I replied softly. He fell quiet for a long second. Layla really misses you. I miss her too. That was the entire exchange. Mallory didn't reach out. Not a single text, not a brief email, not even a smoke signal. But exactly 4 weeks after the explosion, something miraculous happened that I was completely unprepared for. My phone vibrated against my nightstand at 9:45 p.m. on a quiet Monday. Mallory's contact name flashed brightly. I opened the message, my chest instantly tightening with anxiety. I miss you, Aunt Tessa. Can I come over? Love, Layla. The clumsy spelling, the completely lowercase letters, the fact that the word aunt was finally spelled correctly. This wasn't my manipulative sister playing mind games. This was a desperate 8-year-old girl who had cleverly figured out how to unlock her distracted mother's phone. I immediately dialed Rebecca, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the device. Can Mallory legally block me from seeing my niece? I asked, my voice cracking with panic. Rebecca let out a long, sympathetic sigh. In the state of Ohio, aunts do not possess formal custody or visitation rights. However, you are not in a bitter legal dispute. You can safely reach out to the child through Trent. I texted Trent that exact same night. Keep it simple. Please tell Layla I love her. I will always love her. His reply came through in under 3 minutes. She knows. She excitedly told me she secretly sent you a text on Mallory's phone tonight. Her mother has no idea. An 8-year-old child bravely sneaking around just to tell her favorite aunt she missed her. That sweet little girl knows exactly who genuinely loves her. Kids always figure out the truth eventually. Here is a funny fact about tiny towns located just outside of Cleveland. Everyone basically rotates between the exact same three places: the local grocery store, the corner gas station, and Sunday church. And in a tight-knit community like ours, juicy information doesn't even need a Wi-Fi connection to spread. It travels effortlessly through casserole drop-offs and hushed parking lot gossip. Pastor Peterson never publicly shared the dirty details of our dinner. He is a man of strict discretion, and I deeply respect him for that. But the very next Sunday, he delivered a fiery new sermon. The main topic? The grave sin of using financial generosity as a cruel weapon. He didn't name a single person. He didn't have to. Diana was sitting stiffly in the fourth wooden pew. By the time the pastor reached his second talking point, something about how true divine giving never comes with a leash attached, my mother abruptly stood up. She angrily snatched her leather purse and marched straight out the double doors. Delilah recounted the dramatic scene to me later. She said the old wooden pew squeaked loudly when Mom bolted, and while nobody dared to look directly at her, absolutely everybody watched her leave from the corners of their eyes. In the weeks that slowly followed, my phone finally started ringing again. But this time they were calling for me. Uncle Bill apologized sincerely. "I didn't have the whole picture, Tessa. I am so sorry I blindly took sides before learning the actual facts." Two distant cousins texted their support. An older aunt mailed a sweet greeting card. It wasn't a massive parade of apologies, but it was enough to heal my heart. Mallory quietly scrubbed her dramatic Facebook post from the internet. The tearful plea for prayers just vanished one sunny afternoon like it never existed at all. But digital screenshots live forever. I already knew at least 4 different family members had saved the original post and shared the truth. Gordon still refused to call. Complete stubborn silence. Diana called Aunt Delilah twice during that month, but not to offer an apology. She called to bitterly complain. "Tessa violently humiliated us in our very own home," she whined. Delilah shut her down instantly. "No, Diana. Tessa spoke the absolute truth inside your home. Those are 2 completely different things. I never asked a single relative to take my side, but for the very first time in my entire existence, I didn't have to desperately prove I was worth believing." 4 long months later, the tedious bank refinance officially went through. My name was completely scrubbed from Gordon's truck loan. The cheerful credit union officer called to confirm the final transfer, and I simply said, "Thank you so much." I hung up, sat in my parked car for 10 glorious minutes, and did absolutely nothing. Just breathed. It is finally over. The very last financial chain connecting my future to my father's terrible decisions was permanently severed. I bought my house. It wasn't a massive mansion, just a cozy 2-bedroom craftsman tucked away on Oak Street, featuring a small green yard and a welcoming front porch, the exact type of peaceful sanctuary I had been fiercely saving up for since I turned 25. Sure, it desperately needed new rain gutters, and the ugly kitchen cabinets were totally stuck in 1988, but the deed belonged to me. My hard-earned name, my personal mortgage, my own front door. I didn't brag about the purchase on social media. I didn't mail out flashy announcements. The only guests who attended my tiny housewarming party were Rebecca, Delilah, and to my absolute shock, Trent holding Layla's little hand. Mallory fully knew they were coming. Trent had firmly told her exactly where they were spending the afternoon. She didn't dare object. Rebecca arrived carrying a lovely bottle of red wine. Delilah gifted me a lush potted fern, jokingly promising it would outlive us all if I just remembered to water it on Saturday mornings. Trent quietly hauled his heavy metal toolbox inside and immediately fixed the loose brass handle on my back door without ever being asked. That is exactly the kind of decent man Trent is at his core. He fixes broken things in the background. Layla wandered through every single empty room with her small hands clasped behind her back, carefully inspecting the place like a tiny real estate agent. She eventually stopped inside the empty second bedroom. It held nothing but fresh white walls, soft carpet, and a large sunny window overlooking the fenced backyard. She spun around, her eyes wide with hope. "Is this my special room for weekend sleepovers?" I knelt down on the carpet until we were eye level. "Only if you want it to be, sweetheart." She threw her arms around my neck and squeezed me so hard it knocked the breath out of me. It was the specific kind of desperate, clinging hug that meant a child had been saving it up inside for weeks. Later that week, I quietly drove to a different bank. I set aside $40,000 into a high-yield college trust fund specifically for Layla. Nobody's name was printed on that account except mine. Not a single person in the entire family knows about it yet. Some beautiful gifts do not require a greedy audience. 4 months. Gordon Anderson has not dialed his youngest daughter's number in 4 entire months. I know he is perfectly healthy because Delilah constantly feeds me unprompted updates. He reliably mows his patchy lawn. He proudly visits the Elks Lodge every Thursday night. He angrily watches the Browns lose on Sunday afternoons. He does every single thing exactly the way he did before the lottery ticket. Except he no longer picks up the telephone to hear my voice. Diana still calls me occasionally. Every single conversation follows the exact same exhausting script. She always starts with breezy small talk. The upcoming weather forecast, the neighbor's ugly new fence, a funny story she saw on the morning news. Then, she inevitably slides right into the guilt trip. I just deeply wish things could finally go back to normal between us, Tessa, and every single time, I politely deliver the exact same response. I love you very much, Mom, but I will never apologize for having healthy boundaries. She lets out a dramatic sigh. We say our stiff goodbyes. She usually doesn't bother to call back for another week or 2. I thought I had reached the end of my healing journey, perfectly content to leave them behind. But Delilah dropped one final, haunting piece of information last week. A revelation that made me completely rethink everything I knew about the proud, stubborn man who raised me. I am no longer holding my breath for an apology. I have finally made a fragile, quiet peace with the heavy reality that one might never arrive. But I am also refusing to bolt the door shut. It is right here. It remains unlocked. They know exactly where my little house sits, because secrets simply do not stay buried in a tiny town. Aunt Delilah made sure to slip Mom my new street address. All my parents have to do is walk up those wooden front steps without a greedy demand tightly clutched in their hands. But Delilah revealed something softly last week that I just cannot stop turning over in my racing mind. Gordon truly misses you. She swore he will never actually speak those words aloud, but he sits alone on his crumbling front porch every single evening. He just stares blankly at that shiny blue truck in the driveway. I think he finally understands, Tessa. I don't pretend to know what he understands. Perhaps he realizes he owes me a massive pile of cash. Or maybe, just maybe, he realizes he owes me a father. He might just be sitting out there in the fading twilight because he is 62 years old, deeply exhausted, and simply doesn't possess the emotional vocabulary to say, "I failed you." No one ever taught that rigid generation how to surrender. I didn't lose my real family, I remind myself during the quiet nights. I only lost the toxic version of them that violently required me to shrink just so they could feel incredibly tall. I am not sharing this deeply painful journey so you will blindly hate my relatives. They are incredibly flawed, breathing human beings carrying their own invisible scars. My dad tragically lost his factory job years ago, and with it the absolute only identity he had ever built. He was the tough provider, the undisputed head of the household, the weary man who worked endless double shifts. When that proud title was abruptly ripped away, he forgot who he was supposed to be. So, he gripped fiercely onto the only rusty tool he had left. Absolute authority. But authority without actual contribution rapidly mutates into suffocating control. My mother learned how to care from a harsh, older generation that completely refused to separate pure love from rigid obligation. In her anxious mind, loyalty means handing over every piece of yourself and never daring to ask questions. She wasn't consciously plotting to manipulate my future. She genuinely, tragically believes that is exactly how bloodlines are supposed to function. She just never stopped to notice that the endless river of giving was only flowing in one desperate direction. And my older sister, Mallory, never learned how to properly stand on her own 2 feet because no one ever made her try. She was the golden firstborn, the effortlessly pretty one. The girl who happily soaked up the expensive prom dresses and all the dazzling attention. When the real world finally got brutally hard, when the hidden credit cards piled to the ceiling and her marriage violently cracked, she panicked. She desperately reached for the absolute only survival mechanism she understood: somebody else's wallet. I clearly see all of that trauma now, but understanding a deep wound is not the exact same thing as blindly accepting the abuse it causes. You can genuinely love someone with your whole heart and still look them in the eye and say, enough. You can miss a person terribly and still absolutely refuse to revert back to the broken, compliant version of yourself that kept them perfectly comfortable. You can leave your front door unlocked, but still fiercely guard the precious peace living inside your home. If you are listening to this right now, and you are the designated giver in your own house, if you are the reliable target they immediately call when they need emergency cash, but never the person they contact when you simply need a shoulder to cry on, I desperately want you to hear my voice. You are not selfish for drawing a line in the sand. You are not a cold monster for finally demanding to be treated like a breathing human being instead of a personal ATM machine. You are not the villain of their story. You are a survivor. And surviving is more than enough. That is my chaotic, unfinished journey. I truly have no idea how the final chapter ends because I am still actively living it every single day. Maybe my stubborn dad will dial my number tomorrow. Maybe he will take that silence to his grave. I cannot control his pride, but I do know one undeniable truth. The strong, unbreakable woman who sat at that tense dining table, totally calm, fully prepared, and completely done apologizing for her own existence, that is the exact woman I am choosing to be from now on. If this painful, messy confession meant something real to you, please take a second to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And if you have survived your very own Saturday dinner moment, the terrifying second where you finally stopped shrinking yourself to fit someone else's box, I would be incredibly honored to read about it down in the comments. There is another gripping story waiting for you right down in the description box below. It hit my heart just as hard as this one.